Is now 7 o'clock. So welcome everybody to the first quarter webinar for the Financial Foundations. And I am Jeff Pospisil right now, and my co-host, our co-teacher, whatever you want to call us, Sherry Meister. Her computer had to reboot, so she'll be with us as soon as she can. And that'll be awesome because I don't think you want to listen to just me for this entire time. So this webinar, what we're going to focus on is on assessing your church's financial health. A little bit of before we get going all the way, if you do have any questions or anything like that that you want to raise up, there is a chat function. So if you're able to click on the chat, I'll shoot a chat out right now. And this will be a lot easier once Sherry is back on, but if you want to shoot a question or you got a comment to share, that's always helpful and beneficial for everybody. So as a little background to this, this one's on assessing your church's financial health. And Sherry and I, we've worked with a lot of churches, and it's interesting. Most of them only have a kind of idea how they are. You know, there's some symptoms that of health, and there's some symptoms of not health. It almost reminds me of WebMD. Like if you have a gut ache or something like that, and you go ahead and go onto WebMD and you punch in your symptoms, and you know, most of them, way too many of them say you're probably going to die. It's something serious, but then you go to your regular physician and they can usually diagnose it right away. So that's what we want to help churches, because we find that some churches, they're really rich, but they're living like they're poor. And then we have other churches that are living like they shouldn't be worrying about money, but they really should be. And we just want to have do probably two things: help diagnose where you are as a church, and then also be able to make steps to improve that health wherever you're at. An email should have gone out later today or earlier today that had this church financial health assessment. And if you didn't get that, I'll show you real quick where, well, I don't know if I can show you real quick. I'll post it on the, it's at www.dakotasumc.org. And then if you go to finance and benefits, and then over to finance, and then stewardship resources. So I should have had that in the slide, but we just had that posted just a little bit ago. But that would be the assessment that you could take with your church or for your church to help figure out how strong you are health-wise. All right, let's get going. So the first sign or assessment we need to look at is operating reserve. And by the way, a long time ago, I ran into this website, despair.com. And if you ever want fake motivational posters or fake stuff like that, they do coffee mugs too. I kind of get a kick out of them. So this one, preservation: action will be taken to prevent the next disaster as soon as possible after it has occurred. That's how a lot of churches seem to respond to disasters. You could see them coming for a while away, but we don't do a lot to prepare for them, you know. And so an operating reserve would act in probably two ways for most churches. It could be an emergency fund. So let's just say there was a pandemic or something like that. It could help cushion against that, or it could be an opportunity fund, you know, depending on how flush it is. You know, it could be an opportunity. So let's just say there was a ministry that opened, or we wanted to take a chance on a staff position. It would give us that cushion then to make some changes. So what I find in my work with churches is that a lot of churches have their finances set up as a hot dish, the church financial hot dish, everything kind of mixed together. Maybe you call it a casserole, maybe you call it I don't know what you call it. But that's what I find, is that they'll have maybe one checking account or a checking account and a savings account and or CDs, but basically everything's all mingled together. You have your cash for cash flow, you have your reserves, and you have your designated gifts, and basically everything's all stuck in that one dish. And what I've been trying to push a little bit more, because I find it helpful for myself personally, and I find it helpful in the work that I've done, is let's go ahead and separate that out. Let's deconstruct that hot dish. So that you would have an actual checking account for your regular one, for your regular cash flow, and then you would have your cash reserves, your operating reserves, your emergency fund, and an actual separate account. And I usually would say an invested account, just so that way your money is working for you, as long as you're not needing to go to it all the time. A lot of times in emergencies, they shouldn't happen all the time. That's why they're emergencies. So what do I recommend then for a level of reserves? What I find and I've bounced this off of Sherry too, and we bounced this off of quite a few others too. By the way, most of this, what we're going to go over, is not just our thoughts. We visited with a lot of churches. We've talked to a lot of experts. I even called up Dave Ramsey and had a conversation with Dave Ramsey about this as well. So just so you know, it's just not all just coming out of my own head. But what I've found is, like, if you do follow Dave Ramsey, he would say 3 to 6 months. But with a church, I kind of lean more towards that 3 to 12 months, or 25 to 100% of your budget. So whatever your budget is, let's just say your budget is 100,000. That would mean let's go ahead and aim for that operating reserve in the $25,000 to $100,000 mark. And that might seem, for some of you guys, that might seem like a small amount. For some of you guys, that might seem like a huge amount, but that's really what we're aiming for. Hey, Sherry, you're muted.
Oh, here I am. Thanks, Jeff. Sorry about that. I don't know. Wouldn't let me back in.
No, that's cool. I'm glad you're back. I was like, oh no, I'm flying solo. Hopefully I don't go down. So
no, your co-pilot is here.
Yep. All right. So some churches will, I remember the first time we talked this over with the church that had 0 for an operating reserve. They say, well, how do you build that? What do you do? And it's just like anything else, you budget it. You scrape by, you find extra sources of income. Maybe it's the building user fees or something like that. You just stick whatever you can into the savings account. We had one church, Sunnycrest United Methodist Church. I think they put 2 to 3% into just a reserve account, and that's just what they did. At 2 to 3% of every offering they put in there, and it's made a big difference for them. So just that disciplined saving has been I think it takes a lot of the tension and stress out of running the finances of the church. So,
Jeff, in that short amount of time with that church that you referenced, what is their, you just talked to them the other day, what is their balance now? Do you remember?
I wish I did. Off the top of my head, I saw John Surska's on here, so he probably knows. But anyway, but quite, I think it was that small amount, 2 to 3%, and it makes a big difference. So, very smart decision by them. Yeah. So now, if you do have that worksheet in front of you, we're going to kind of pause. And I don't remember if we have the polling questions too. So, here's my graphic, the growing. So, but we have this little kind of test. And so on the far left is the red. And so if you're in that area and let's just say you have no reserve, nothing set up for emergencies, all you have is a checking account and you're hoping there's enough to pay your bills. That would be a 0. Then when budgeting. Okay.
This is the polling for this one, Jeff.
Is it? Okay. So, and then if you have some reserves in checking, or just kind of, if you got the hot dish type of reserves, that's worth 1 point. If you have 10 to 25%, so you're making progress towards your goal of 3 to 12 months, and it's invested. And again, I do like it invested in something, whether it's a money market, or I would actually prefer some kind of a mutual fund like your foundations, offer. Or then if you get all the way to green, that's worth 3 points. So kind of keep a tally.
Jeff,
All
it looks
right.
like the majority do include both projected income and the expected expenses.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. Good to see.
Yeah, that is good.
All right.
Cool. All right. The next one we're going to is capital reserves. And I like these demotivators. Problems. No matter how great and destructive your problems may seem now, remember your problems you're probably only seeing the tip of them. And that's what I always think about with the capital problems. You probably got stories too, but I remember when I was first at Bismarck First United Methodist Church, and we knew we had furnace issues or boiler issues, and we knew it was really bad when the boiler repair guy actually joined as a member of our church because he was there on Sunday morning so often. Isn't that when the boiler almost always goes out, by the way? But how expensive was that? So yeah, so the importance of having some kind of a capital reserve. A lot of us have, our expensive facilities that are difficult to maintain. And so what is a proper reserve for something like that? And so here's the three main ones that happen the most often. So parking lots, repaving the parking lots. Here was Plankinton United Methodist Church. Roofs, also another expensive thing. And sometimes you just hope for a hailstorm, but we didn't even get a hailstorm recently. So this was Yankton United Methodist Church. And then boilers, or HVAC, those kinds of things. Those are expensive, and they're also not easy always to fundraise for, I'm guessing, Sherry. So
No, those are not people's favorite thing to put their money towards. That really is best if it can come out of a capital reserve.
Yeah. And these are one of those things where, and I haven't talked to these churches specifically, but I've talked to other ones where I ask them after they've done something like replaced a boiler, how much do you think it's going to cost next time? And then we just do a real simple thing on how, if you started saving money now. So now we have a question polling one that comes up. Do you have a capital reserve? And then the test, or I guess what we're aiming for in this, kind of similar to your operating reserve. I want to have some kind of a thermostat. What's a good guide? And for me, what I've found is you really want to aim for at least about 10% of your insured value if you can. I mean, so you think about, let's just say you have $1 million facility, to do the roof, it's going to cost at least $100,000, right? If you have to do the parking lot, that's going to cost quite a bit. So this might end up only being the seed money, but I would rather have $100,000 earning maybe 7% per year rather than having to fundraise all of a sudden and maybe taking a loan out and paying 5% out the other way. So cool. So it looks like we do have quite a few people that have a capital reserve, and some of them have a healthy amount. Some of them have a healthy amount. Some of us, it's probably not. You'd like to have that 10 to 20% probably. So,
Jeff, I'm surprised you didn't go in and change these colors, because yes is in the red, and you have taught me that should never be that way. That yes should always be green or blue, and
yep.
so we'll have to keep track of that next time.
Red and black or something, maybe.
Right.
So again, if you have $1 million facility, aiming for that $100,000 to $200,000 would not be a bad thing. And again, this is something you would budget for. Building use fees, anything you can to try to build this up. I mean, this is something you're going to have to be a little scrappy on. If you get a small bequest that it's unrestricted, I wouldn't mind funneling some of that way too. So, all right. Did we share the results?
You did.
Okay. Did I? Okay. All right. So then again, we have our test again. And again, this ties with the worksheet that went out or that's found online. Again, no reserve, that's worth 0. Some kind of reserve, but you don't know how much because it's all mixed in with checking, that would be worth 1. If you have a small reserve, maybe you just got a small, couple thousand or something put aside and you're hoping it'll grow, that would be worth 2. And then if you have a fully funded reserve, that would be worth 3. All right. Oh, we coupled a new boiler with adding an air conditioner and the money flew out of the wallets and purses. Candace brings up a point. We've done this. So the one, I'm going to go back. Sometimes, Sherry, if you are going to raise money for a project like this, you almost always have to tie in the mission of the church and stories. I remember, so you helped the Yankton Church raise money for that, and tying in what was it? The children's ministry and the youth was part of that project.
Yeah, the capital campaign. Then they were redoing one part of their building. Another thing that is more effective for fundraising in these situations in a capital is if there's money ahead of time as seed money, or that you have taken from your reserves, so that you are prepared and you show the church members that you're prepared to do this capital campaign and to ask for the dollars. It's very, very difficult to raise for a capital campaign if you're starting with absolutely no dollars, because you're having money in the bank and putting it towards this is ensuring confidence in your members.
And I believe you're a fan of bundling too, if you can. So of time, instead of doing a few smaller fundraisers, bundle them together for the bigger vision of the church. So.
Right. And to that point, Jeff, it's because people get tired of having you come back one time after another, right after you finish one campaign or a campaign for a roof, and say, oh, wait a minute, we should have done the siding too. Or you're going to do a different piece in your lower level to accommodate children's ministries. People will respond much better, like Jeff said, if it's bundled.
So now we're going to go ahead and go on to debt. And this one is agony, not all pain is gain. And one of the things that we noticed is sometimes debt can be useful. I'm barely saying that because I'm an anti-debt kind of guy. One of the first things I did when I got this job is in the conference is eliminate our debt. We had a couple of mortgages and we had a tractor loan and some other stuff. So first thing I did was get rid of that debt. But I understand that I have a mortgage on my house, so I'm not completely anti-debt. But what we've seen is, so this is one of our churches in 2006. This happens to be, and they did a large building project, $8 million project, I believe. They ended up financing $4 million of it. And this is that church today. So 15 years later, again, it's a beautiful facility, but it's still about just under $2 million mortgage still. And when I see that pastor and when I talk to them, you could tell it's a weight on them. It's a weight on their ministry. You almost have to filter everything through. Okay, how is this going to affect? Are we still going to be able to pay the mortgage? And it is one of those things where you see a church like this that was just booming up until that debt just weighed down their ministry. So.
Here's the next question, Jeff.
Okay. All right.
If you have debt, do you have a debt reduction plan? And are you on pace to eliminate your debt in the next 5 years?
And the big reason why we say, do you have a plan? That's one of the most important things. I like it when, first of all, we're Methodists. So chances are if your pastor stays 10 years, that's a long time. So we've seen a couple of churches where the pastor will raise the money or raise enough money to build and then have a debt, and then they'll leave. And you lose momentum then. So that's a tough thing. Oh yeah, Sherry Olson says no debt. So if you have no debt, put I don't know. So that would be one way to answer that one. So so here's the results, and a lot of them have a plan. So that's good. Over half have a plan. And are you on pace to eliminate it? And this is a good number, actually 39%. That is very encouraging. So, and with our own, and with this one, if you're following along with the worksheet or anything else, here would be if you have debt with no plan, like a lot of them do. They're just assuming the debt will go away in maybe 30 years. That's a 0. If you have a plan to manage payments, so in other words, maybe you have a fund set up that you encourage people to give to, but there's no real plan to actually eliminate the debt, that would be worth 1 point. If you have a plan to retire the debt in within 10 years, I mean, that's 10 years is a long time to be paying large mortgage payments and have your bank be one of the biggest recipient ministries, I guess. So that's worth 2 points. And then if you're debt free, that is 3 points. I think that is the ideal for a lot of churches, even healthy churches. If you have that debt, it does affect you, especially when you're in tough times like this, where politically, and then there's also these other issues that are going on with the pandemic and all these, there's just so many issues that you don't want to have that doubt in there in your mind that, okay, what if I say something really bad and I can't pay the mortgage? So, all right. Budget accuracy is the 4th one. Budget accuracy, consistency. It's only a virtue if you're not a screw up. So one of the things that I've always found interesting, in no other place would you budget like most churches do. A lot of, and I don't even know if I should say most churches, but many churches do. They will know pretty much how much the expenses are. But as far as the income, they really don't, sometimes they don't budget for it, or they just don't even, or they don't budget even in the realm of reality. I mean, normally what would you do personally is you would look, how much am I going to make? And then you would split that out into various expenses. So, so here's how a normal budget should work. Let's just say you have a budget of 100,000. Most churches are just aiming to break even. So maybe they bring in 98,000 in 2020. That'd be not bad for a pandemic year for this church. And then they have operating expenses of 102. So overall, not bad, a slight deficit. So their accuracy, well, they're not bad, 1.6% to 2.4%. And again, 2020 might not be a great year for comparison. But this, in a typical year, this is how a lot of churches will budget. They'll budget, again, that 100,000, and you'll see that they always come up short. They're always and they always have to then borrow from their hot dish, their financial reserve hot dish. And it's one of those things that gets to be very frustrating. Or they do, actually, there's something they also do too, is they'll send the finance chairperson to make a plea in front of the church, which is always an awkward thing, especially for guests. Robert asks, we have found that pledges as a percent of total receipts is decreasing over time. It is a lot. I think for a lot of the people that are newer to church, they do not want to feel bound by a pledge, even myself. So I don't know if I'm on the edge of that, but I remember when I was a new member at Bismarck First United Methodist Church, I didn't want to pledge because I didn't think I can keep that promise. You know, I had a young family and I thought, well, I'm just going to put, and I gave them a formula. I said 10% of my income minus a couple other things. I was a nerd accountant. So, but I just felt so uncomfortable making a pledge. We are seeing, instead of pledges, and it's very similar, we're seeing more estimated giving type of things. If churches are doing some kind of a pledge drive, they'll make it an estimate of giving, which gives that kind of impression that, you know, if things go like they're going, I'll be able to give $10,000 or whatever it is, or I'll be able to give 3,000. So,
Robert, to that point too, and Jeff, just I was going to jump in here. One of the things is our younger members are not kind of signing up for a fee, and it feels like a fee to them if they do it monthly. The younger generation is giving generously to places that are near and dear to their heart, but they'll do it in like one lump sum. And so it's just, I think that's a trend, is the age of our, you know, the younger people that are coming in have just a different philosophy on how to do pledges. Like Jeff said, they don't want to feel bound to that, but they're also not on a consistent, you know, they don't have magazine subscriptions anymore, and they don't have many things that, about the only thing they'll do monthly is a gym.
and Hulu and
Hulu, yeah, and any gaming. That was going to be my next one. But when it comes to organizations, they're not as apt to have that same trend that we'd seen in the past.
Even from the conference side, I mean, for us to, I mean, apportionments aren't pledges, but it's one of those things where churches no longer, as the leadership changes in churches, they no longer see that apportionment as maybe a set amount like you would think it would be. It's kind of a, well, here's how much we feel like giving. You know, that's an interesting question that Becky brings up. Would you consider automatic gifts, electronic gifts, those reoccurring gifts as pledges? And you know, I never thought of that before. That might be a way to think about it too. I'd often thought about just even combining the pledge card with the automatic giving card. So, back to our example, by the way. So for a lot of these ones, operating income, you know, they're easily off by this 10% or more. A lot of times their expenses are pretty close. They might be adjusting their expenses slightly downward as they feel the crunch, but a lot of times it's that income is the made up number. So the better you're able to get a track on that number. And again, pledges might not be as good of an indicator as it used to be, but looking at your historical giving will give you a good idea. So I don't know if we have another question or relating to this one or not, or polling question. Okay,
we don't, Jeff, but here's one that they can answer once they figure out where they're at on here. It's does leadership or your pastor preach on stewardship annually?
Yeah, that'll be the next one. So,
okay.
Oops,
sorry.
Yep. You're jumping ahead.
I just got a little ahead of myself. Sorry about that.
So, but if you do have the worksheet, or if you're following along, you know, if you don't have a budget, that's a bad thing. And partially why I say that is your ministry plan in numbers. Your budget is your ministry plan in numbers. So if you want to make changes for the good, it'll end up showing up in the budget. So no budget, that's worth 0. If total income and expenses are way off by plus 10%, that's one. That's 1. So if you have a budget, even if it's not accurate, I'm giving you a point. If your total income's off by 10%, but your budget is otherwise accurate, that's 2 points. And if you have an accurate budget, that is 3 points. So, and all this ends up tallying together to give you a health score, by the way. All right. The next one is on the next area of assessment. The 5th area is stewardship teaching. And the demotivator is aspiration. I hear the call to do nothing and am doing my best to answer it. How many churches have you talked to, Sherry, where the pastor seems afraid to talk about money?
The majority.
And it's an uncomfortable thing. I mean, honestly, it is. It's uncomfortable. Some pastors, they're not handling money well, but some of them just feel like, I know I'm a large chunk of the budget, so it doesn't feel right for me to do it. But honestly, so budgeting, we are assuming a normal year, by the way. Julie Hamill asked that. Yes. So we are assuming, so you might have to look to 2019. A lot of times, the only time they talk about money in some of our churches is when you're so far behind that you have to send the treasurer or the finance chair in front of the church to show them the budget and say, hey, look, we're far behind. I remember going to one church that it was an Episcopalian church. So apologies if there's anybody that's Episcopalian in this. But they had this beautiful choir, beautiful old building. Everything was great. And then instead of a sermon, they had the finance guy say, hey, we're behind. We need to step up on our giving. If we don't give, we're not going to be able to keep the church open. And I was like, oh, I am never going to be Episcopalian. So that was exactly what I thought. And I've never been in an Episcopalian church since then. I've been in a lot of churches, but not an Episcopalian. So anyway, I'm sure not all of them are like that, but still. So I kind of take so when we say teaching on stewardship, sometimes we think, oh, okay, that's just about giving. But if you look at what John Wesley taught, it was that earn, save, give. So a lot of his teaching was, how do you handle money in a godly way? So how do you earn money in a godly way? How do you save money? How do you use it in the most godly way for your family and for those around you? And then the last piece was give. And so giving is also a matter of discipleship too. And this is the thing that I find, and this is why I always encourage pastors to preach on generosity too, is and Sherry says this quite often too, your money will be what is it? Now that verse, your treasure is where your heart will be. Am I getting that backwards? No,
your heart is where your treasure is.
Your heart is where your treasure is where your heart will be.
Always get it mixed up.
Oh, shoot. We are so backwards today. You can tell it's been a while since I've been in the field preaching. So sorry. But there's that idea that when they start giving to the church and when they start giving to the ministry of Jesus Christ, their heart changes a little bit. And that's what we really, it's a part of discipleship. And I just have seen too many people that have said basically, I didn't know what I was missing out on until I started giving. And that's what I want people to feel. And Sherry, working with the many donors, that's why I think you're so confident working with donors, is that this is something that it feels better for them to be able to do something like this. So
right, Jeff, and you're more successful in their giving if you bring, I said pooling earlier, but even if you bring all of the ministries, if you're not doing a capital campaign and you want just regular giving, and you lay out the stories of all the ministries within your church, people will find where their heart is and they'll give to those areas. And that's my favorite thing one of my favorite things to do in my job is to make that match with a donor and what they love, because the joy that they express once they've decided the dollar amount to give is just, it's just a great day when that can happen.
So let's relaunch that poll. How about? So do you or the leadership of your church preach or teach on stewardship annually? So I just think it's so important. And I do like that idea of teaching both on how do you manage it in your personal life, a lot of scripture on how you manage it, your debt, how you manage your income, your finances, everything. So that is all positive. And a lot of you do, the vast majority of them, there is a solid teaching. And that's, if you want this is probably one of the best ways to grow, or at least start growing your regular operating income, is to have a teaching, have a like Sherry said too, the testimonies, the stories are one of the big things too. The idea that the gifts are changing lives, not only your own but others' lives too. All right. And now, so now that if you're following along on the worksheet, if yours is a church that never mentions money, that's 0 points. If yours is a church that does that, it sends your finance guy up front once a year to do a plea to give, that's 1 point, because that's even something. I mean, that's the only reason why, even though it drove me away, it must have some effect on some people. So, but you're at least
Well,
willing
Jeff, you're still talking about it. So
you're still talking about it. Yeah.
That's what they say about bad advertising. People are still talking about it.
Yep. Yeah, South Dakota, we're on meth, something like that. Meth, we're on it, I guess is what it is. Yeah. Anyway, if you emphasize giving or stewardship, so if you mention, if you're leaning just to one side, either the practical or the generosity side, but not both, that's 2 points. And if you're hitting both of them, and again, we're saying preaching or teaching. So like let's just say you have a Financial Peace University for those people that you want, that's what you're using to equip, or a Crown Financial, or whatever there is out there to help equip people to personally manage their finances. And then maybe you do a preaching series. I would count that so as 3 points. So, all right, we're down to the second to last one. And this one is a focus team, committees, just like teamwork, only without the work. So I don't know why I like this one. I don't even know if this one fits all the way, but when I've looked at and worked with some churches, what I notice is something like this. I don't know if you've seen this picture from a while back. This guy was caught. I think his wife took the picture of him mowing the lawn before the tornado could get there. And we work with churches that are so focused on just the expense part. You know, they want to they'll want to track every single expense, but they'll ignore the income side, or maybe they'll ignore the reserves, and they just focus entirely on just that expense piece, to the danger of the whole church, actually, in a lot of ways. So John Surska says they incorporate it the messages throughout the year, and that is probably one of the best things to do, is to tie that in there, so it's not unnatural, and it's not like, oh, this is stewardship month, I'm going to skip. So I don't know if people do that. So again, there's really 3 parts what I see to a finance committee. First of all, it is what are 3 parts of financial fiduciary, so roles that you got to do. So watching the spending, which is what most of the people that I'm like, finance committees like to do. We'll watch the spending. The second piece is really growing givers, doing whatever you can to encourage it or facilitate growing givers through the teaching and preaching on stewardship. So, and then the other part would be managing the reserves, or trying to build those assets. And sometimes this is handled by a foundation, and I don't think that's a bad deal either. I think one of the big things that we found is that in too many churches, the foundation of the church and the actual leaders, so you got 2 different parts, your administrative council and then your foundation. They almost act like they're completely separate. Is that right, Sherry? So
that's exactly right. We just encountered that at the end of last week in that situation, and we're trying to bring those 2 groups together so that the earnings from the foundation can help with the ministries of the church, and they should be working simultaneously together in that respect.
Yeah, we've seen somewhere they really have, the church leadership has absolutely no idea how much money's in the foundation. They have no idea what the restrictions are, what the opportunities are. It is an interesting relationship, not all the way healthy. So,
Jeff, that's a great segue to our next webinar too. So that we'll talk about at the end really quick is how to best utilize those endowments and investment funds.
cool. So, and I don't know if we had a question for this or not, but if you have your worksheet, if all you do, yeah. So the polling question is your finance, do they also focus on encouraging giving as well as watching expenses? And sometimes you partner, you might have a stewardship type of team or a generosity team. And as long as they're partnering and you're on the same page, I think that's a fine thing. Yeah, this is a really good group. I mean, there's a lot of people that are, because I know
Jeff,
for me, okay, I'm going to tell you about my very first finance committee meeting. So so you see desperation brainstorming is number one. My very first finance committee meeting was 2002, and it was kind of after that recession. That recession was really affecting our church, and we were way behind, and we were trying to put together the budget. And the idea was, who do we think is going to pass that's going to leave us enough money to make the budget balance? And so that's that's where you get to desperation brainstorming. And a lot of times none of those ideas, very few of those ideas ever go forward anywhere, but sometimes they do. So that's why I count that for 1 point. Yeah, we do have a lot of people that are focusing on encouraging giving. And there's so many ways to focus on that. In how you thank people and the opportunities you allow people to give, all these other things. So that's why I like having a team focusing on it. And if you have all three of those areas working together, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit. Sorry about that. So I'm kind of watching the polls and getting excited. But anyway, let's go ahead and go to the last one.
Jeff, just on that with the team, it's also important what we see many times that people will put all finance people on their finance committee.
Yeah.
Instead of entrepreneurs. I now sit on the Sioux Falls Seminary Kairos program board of trustees. And we had our first meeting last weekend, and it was so encouraging to see they had this whole group of people on this committee are these young entrepreneurs. And they were also very generous, and they were talking about the ways that they're giving back into the community. And they had such a different perspective on how to do the ministry. And I think sometimes if you get all finance people, then they're nobody wants to spend the church's money or somebody else's money. So you need the ministry side too to pull that in so that people can see it and have a balance.
Well, and don't you find that, like, if you got people like me, if you tell a typical accountant, well, this is how much you need to give because the church needs it, they'll just think that's how all people are. All people, if you just tell them what the need is, and then they'll just do that, but really that's not the majority of people. Majority of people, they want to give to something that's changing lives. They want to be thanked. They wanted to be kind of convinced to some degree so that it's worthy. So yeah, it takes a different mindset. It takes somebody almost, I don't want to say sales, but it's kind of that mindset that you are in a way selling them on that the church is worthy of receiving their gifts. So all right, so the last one is invested leaders. Distinction. Looking sharp is easy when you haven't done any work. So there are, what I run into is I'll get calls every now and then from a church, and it's a frustrated finance committee person or a frustrated treasurer that is really wanting to do something, but everybody else is dragging their feet, and that's kind of was the inspiration behind this, and thinking about it. And then I was thinking about the best teams I guess I've ever served on. They were all invested. And so an example is, if you're moving a couch, by the way, I have no idea what this four-arm forklift is, but it looks kind of sweet. I would almost buy one because it makes it look super easy. But if you got two people that are doing the work, that's not so bad. But then you just add three extra people, and three extra people, even if they're not doing anything, it makes the work that much harder. And by the way, so hopefully the Bernie Sanders meme is not over with. So.
You just couldn't help yourself, could you, Jeff?
I couldn't. So, but really, when you got people that are just on the committee and they're just kind of going to be the naysayers or critical, and they're not doing anything, it makes it so much harder for anybody that is wanting to do something. So, yeah. So this rule, Pareto's law, is pretty commonly accepted, but it's basically 80% of your results come from 20% of the people. And in most of the church giving records that I've studied, they're roughly around here, that 80% of your total giving is coming from 20% of your giving units. So if you were to look at, let's just say you have a church of 100 giving units, that if you were to look at the top 20, roughly that would be 80% of your total giving. So, and this one too, what I've had is people on the nominations committee, they'll just run it by the financial secretary. They'll just say, before they vet, that's how they'll do their vetting. So the financial secretary will give a nod one way or another, because one of the tough things was, and this goes back to, again, my time at Bismarck First, is I remember we were just started tithing at the time, and we were giving about $4,000 a year. And I remember at Charge Conference, we were having an argument about something, and somebody got up and said, well, of course the young people want this. They're not paying for it. Well, I knew stuff and I couldn't share it or anything like that, but I knew that we were in the top 10 of givers, even though we were only making single income family, had 2 kids, only pulling down about 40,000 a year. We were in the top 10 of givers, giving units, and the person that spoke up was giving half as much as we were. And I was just like, are you serious? And again, one of those things that you bit your tongue, but that's what I kind of say. That's a person not carrying their load. They end up making more weight for the rest of us to carry. So, so in our churches, I'm not surprised a lot of people are unsure. That might be kind of hidden, but it should be part of the nominations process, where your key leaders, and I'm saying key leaders would be those that make significant decisions in the area of personnel, property, and finance. So that would be those ones that should be on your giving list. And for a lot of churches, this isn't going to be a super high amount. It's not like you got to be a doctors, lawyers, investment fund managers, or anything like that. This is, if you're probably giving $1,000 to $2,000, you very well could be in that top 20% in most churches. So, the other thing I want to say too, the one exception I would say is if you have youth or young adults, like college students or something like that, if they're giving, period, I would say that would put them as a giver. If there's somebody that is just really not bringing down much of an income, that would be kind of the exception to that, because they're giving generously out of, but I still think they should give something. So our last one would be is if you just don't know, and this is if your church doesn't know, like they just turn a complete blind eye, nobody knows. who in leadership's giving or not. At least the financial secretary should be, I encourage you to have them help vet the nominations process. So if your church turns a blind eye to that, that's 0. If there's probably 1, maybe 2 that you're sure of, that's interesting. We have a number of churches where you'll have 1 large giver and then everybody else just kind of looks at them and lets them run the show. And that's something, at least. So I don't know. If about half of your leadership are givers, then that's 2 points. And then if the vast majority of your leadership are givers, that's 3 points. And for me, what I found is the churches that I've served on where the vast majority of people were tithing or working towards a tithe, it totally changed the dynamics of that leadership team. So you had people that didn't want to go off the leadership team because it was exciting and stuff was happening. So, all right. So now we get to the final part. If you've been keeping a running tally, or if you have that worksheet here, here's the thing. If you're in that high 16 to 21, so if you added up all those different ones, there's 21 possible. 16 to 21, you're doing awesome. You're financially fit. You should be feeling fairly comfortable where you're at. You know, there might be a couple areas to improve, but that you can work on that later. So, or at your own pace. If you're at that 11 to 15, you're probably normal. That's neither good nor bad. There's definitely room to improve, but you at least know what looking a little bit more financially fit would look like, so you can strive towards that. Then if you're in that 6 to 10, that's urgent care, and you really do need to get cracking. And we're going to talk about what the priorities for how to start correcting some of this would be. But 6 to 10, there should be some urgency on making this one of your high priorities for getting it straightened out. And then if you're 0 to 5, I would say call your district superintendent. I mean, that's where you're at. I would call your district superintendent, and hopefully you're able to get that worked out. So, because that likely means you have 0 in reserves, maybe you have debt, and your leadership's not invested. So there's basically a perfect storm going on. So in the worksheet, we kind of spell this out a little bit more, but there is a priority list. So, and it's pretty much the reverse of what we were looking at. I mean, the very first thing, if you can do that, is to get a team together. It's so hard for one person to turn it. I've seen a lot of pastors try just by themselves, or I'll see one treasurer or one finance committee person try to turn it by themselves. But up until you get a focused team looking at this and working on this, it is very hard to move in the right direction. And then the next one after you get your team is to focus on stewardship training, stewardship teaching, I guess. And the idea is if you can bring in more money, it makes everything a whole lot more easy. And that is what that does. And that slowly builds. It's not a quick turnaround. There's no quick turnaround in this to build that operational giving, but you'll start seeing churches that we've seen do this. They end up growing by 5 to 7%, right around that area, usually pretty much every year. Some of the churches that have been doing this, they didn't need to take out a PPP loan. I mean, they kind of considered it, but their giving was up and their expenses were down, so they didn't. But it didn't happen overnight. That's why you start on that. The next one that's easy to do is getting an accurate budget. So budgeting, looking at your income and trying to look at historical trends and seeing how that is. The ones that take longer, getting a plan to retire your debt and getting organized around that, coming up with a plan to start building those reserve accounts. Those are a longer journey, but they're worth it too. So, but really those are facilitated once you get the first 4 done. All right, that brings us to the bottom. Oh, you're scoring, and we went through the topic, seemed a little different from the worksheet. So, okay, use the worksheet. for the PowerPoint, I had a little bit of a tough time making it all match. I kind of liked the idea of using a gauge when I was doing the PowerPoint. But when I was doing the worksheet, a gauge didn't seem like it worked well. So, and I'm an accountant, so I don't make really pretty forms, but so the worksheet is the better tool to use, and it would be a good one to use with your team too, to assess where you're at. So we will have this posted, the webinar posted online probably tomorrow, and send it out. And we'll also resend out probably a link to the worksheet as well. And if we have some other stewardship tools, that would be beneficial as well. So.
And now our commercial, Jeff,
All
for,
right.
for next time on May 10th. Everyone join us for our webinar will be I can't remember exactly the title, but it's about your biggest giver doesn't even attend your church, and talking about endowments and investments, and how to encourage those of your givers and wills and estates and all of those things. So I hope that you'll join us on May 10th at 7 p.m. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Stay warm and stay safe.
Let's hit Sherry's real quick. You guys can leave if you want, and I'm going to talk to Sherry Olson's question real quick, and I want to hear Sherry also mention it as well. So let's say your church is in trouble financially. How would you communicate that without scaring people off? And for me, I'm not one for hiding anything. I mean, what I propose is, first of all, making it regularly available. Like in my bulletin, we always have a monthly update, and it's really short. I mean, it's showing where we are expense-wise, where we are income-wise, where we are against the budget, and it's simple enough. Those of us that are watching that, that is an important thing. So if I was going to tell people, what seems to work is, okay, let's start off almost with the sandwich of good, bad, good. So I would thank people for their giving, and we've done a lot of good has happened this year. We're a little bit behind now. That's the bad area. Giving is a little bit tough. This is tough times, but we have an important ministry, and that kind of thing. And then go ahead and go back to the thanking, again, thank you for your gifts, and for those that are going to be stepping up in their giving. And, there's opportunities to give online or through stock or whatever else. But I would kind of go like that. You don't want to just hit them smack dab, here's the bad news, and have it stay. I prefer kind of that sandwich approach where you start positive, then go to the tougher news, and then end on positive. So Sherry, does that seem to fit?
That does fit, and including in that positive piece to have, what is your story? What's the story of the church? What good things are you doing? How are you building disciples? And make sure that piece is in the story too, so that it's not just keeping the lights on.
Yeah. Hopefully that helped. So, all right.
All right, everybody. See you in May. Thanks. Stay safe and stay warm.